We are wiring electrical switch breakers. We're going to place them into our electric distribution panel. We have two different types of breakers we're going to wire. We have a single breaker and a double breaker. The single breaker will distribute from the bus bar here, will distribute one hot wire, 120 volts, to go to a single appliance, like your receptacle or refrigerator or something like that. This double breaker actually has two hot lines that come out of it. So we have 120 volt and 120 volt for 240 volts total. And we use these to send stuff to like your dryer, your hot water heater, the heating and air conditioner outside. It transfers, it splits up the amps so that you do not have quite so many amps in one wire, and splits it up and gets enough voltage to run the equipment. In our distribution panel here, we pass our wires through what are known as Romex connectors. It's a little bitty piece, it screws together. There are knockouts and plugs, and you can see where there's holes in this panel box, and there's a couple in the bottom. You take the Romex connector, you poke it up through, and then you screw it back together. It's got these two screws that you adjust, and you can open this window and you use that to pass the wire through. What it does is create a sealed compartment for your electrical wires. One of the main reasons we seal them up is for bugs. Fire ants love wires. They will literally get into a box and eat all the insulation off of one and cause a short. And when you get a short, what do you get? You get heat. When you get enough heat, what do you get? You get a fire. And when you get a fire, your baby sister dies. Again, for the third time, I'm passing this piece of wire for our double breaker, and it actually has two hot wires in it. We introduced this earlier when we did three-way switches. This is a piece of 12-3 with a ground, 12 gauge wire. It has a black hot, a red hot, a white neutral, and a bare ground. I passed it up through the Romex. You need to make sure you have a lot of slack wire, because you're going to need to move it around the box. So once I do that, I reach under the Romex and I tighten the screws that hold the cable in place. When working in your switch box, you need to make sure you have all your insulation stripped away, that you have bare individual wires. One way to do this is to take the ground wire and pull it, and you can use it to rip through this other insulation. I'm going to grab it with a pair of wire strippers, hold the other ones, and then I'm going to pull down on it. I'm using that to rip back through the main coat of insulation to expose my separate wires and then cut off the excess. I'm going to wire the double breaker first. I'm going to take my two hot wires, my black and my red hot wires, and I'm going to bend them over out of the way to one side. I'm going to take my ground and my neutral wire, which we showed you earlier how you wire the panel up. I'm going to bring them over. I'm going to run them around the outside of the box. And this is all for safety's sake. And in this case, they're a little long. I'm going to cut them off just a little bit, make them shorter, strip back the white wire. And as we did before, I'm going to place them under a screw that's on the ground and neutral bar over here and tighten. In the switch box, we do our grounds and neutrals first, and then we push them to the back out of the way. There's ways to separate things, like at an airport coming into Atlanta. There's lots and lots of airplanes coming in and out all the time, and as you drive through Atlanta, you look up, you see all these airplanes in the sky, and you wonder why they don't run into each other. Well, many times, they're separated by distance one behind the other, but they're also can be separated by height. So we take that idea and turn it into our box. We put our grounds and neutrals to the back. We put our hot wires to the front. We don't want any place where they cross and touch each other. Now I'm going to take my double breaker, and if you flip it around and you look at it, it's got 2 screws to where you connect your 2 wires. It's also got 2 little connectors that connect on these lugs on the bus bar. It's got a little indentation on the back. I hang it, catch it into the back along the line of the bar on either side, and it'll kind of lock into place. And then I rotate it forward till it catches on these 2 metal prongs, and then just push it in place. And literally all it does is grab and slide down on the piece of metal, and that's literally how it holds with a little spring action. So my 2 hot wires I bring over, I bend them around out of the way and back, and then I look at them and realize they're long, so I'm gonna have to cut and strip them. And one goes under one screw and one goes the other. It doesn't matter which one goes where. You have to make sure you go under very well and all the way up under. And once you do that, you take your screwdriver and tighten it. Then you want to pull on them to make sure they're not loose, and then bend your wires up out of your way. Make sure they're pretty neat. Neatness counts in this game. If you open a switch panel up and it's not neat, the inspector's probably going to fail you. You'll see actual switch panels that some of these guys do. Every wire comes and bends and makes a perfect little bend. They're all twisty tied together, and everything is separated, and they take a lot of pride in their switch boxes. You have to make sure everything in here is tight, because you know what happens when wires aren't tight. You get an arc. The next thing that happens when you get an arc is you get heat. After heat is a fire. And the last thing is you burn your house down, killing your baby sister yet again. We did a little looking a little while ago, and we discovered that roughly 500 people die every year in America from house electric fires. So by the time you go to bed at night, somebody in America died from electrical short somewhere in their house. I'm tightening the Romex connector. For the single one, we're just going to use a piece of 14-2. That means we have a black wire, a white wire, and a bare ground wire. Tighten it in the Romex connector. I'm going to have to strip it back again. So I'm going to grab my neutral wire. I'm probably going to grab it with a pair of pliers and pull down against the insulation. I'm going to grab the other set of wires and then pull back. And you can strip a long piece. Pull our insulation out of the way. Cut that. One of the other differences I see a lot of time between good electricians and so-so electricians is a good one will clean up and police his area at the end of the day. We'll find a lug that I'm going to go under, figure out where I need to cut these off, and I got the wrong wire. I need the ground and the neutral, and that's how easy it is to make a mistake on this. Cut and strip. Place it under a lug, under a screw, on the ground neutral bar. Tighten, wiggle it to make sure it's tight. Press it back out of the way, because you don't want anything up here touching this. You never run wires up over the top to come to these ground neutral bars. If you bring in and you start stacking out, you start stacking breakers all up this side, you bring all your grounds and neutrals around the bottom to come in. You never cross a ground neutral at the top because that's very hot. If you open up a switch panel, you pull it off the cover, you don't stick your fingers up in here at all because that's where all the electricity is. In reality is, yes, you can touch some stuff around the edges, but you don't just reach in, which goes, there's enough electricity coming in to kill you instantly. So you definitely keep away from these areas right in here, and you never cross anything across the top. Never do that. It's just totally unsafe. Taking my hot wire here, and if you can see in the video, you can see my black wire is up on the front, and the ground and neutrals are behind it. So I'm actually separating it with depth within the box. Strip back. I'm going to bend it and place it right under the screw. Most of the time these screws run through a little plate, and actually what you're doing is squeezing the two plates together. Hold that wire up under. Tighten the screw down all the way. Wiggle it to make sure it's there. And if you notice, I had the breakers turned off before I even connected any of my wires. And if you're doing this for real in any house, you have to make sure that the service to this panel is completely off. Means there's no live electricity coming to it. At most houses where you walk on the outside and look, the new houses have a round meter base. And under that meter base, you're going to see what looks like a breaker box similar to this. And most of the time, it's going to have a big one, a big breaker in it, and it'll say 200 on the front. That means 200 amps is the amount of amperage that can flow through that breaker, and that's the normal load for a house is 200 amps. There's two of these wires. So there's 120 volts, 120 volts. There's a total of 240 volts coming to the house, but only 200 amps. The amps are kind of like the energy that the hammer may weigh a pound, but how fast you swing it and how hard it hurts, because that's more like the amps. So you leave your breakers off. So what I want to see from y'all now is I want to see you take two pieces of wire. You may find wire that's already stripped back that's in the buckets. You may not. If you come in through the Romex connectors, tighten the two Romex connectors. You need a piece of 12-3 for the double breaker. You need a piece of 12-2 for the single breaker. I want to see you come back in, strip it, route your ground and neutrals around to the ground neutral bar. I want to see you bring your hot wires over to your double. I want to see you pull on it to make sure the wires are tight up under it. Take your piece of 12-2, run your grounds and neutrals up. I want to see all that pushed to the back of the box. Then I want to see your hot wire that comes over and runs in the back of your single breaker. I want you to wiggle it and show me that it is there. When you get finished, upload that video back in the classroom.